Airing first on Asheville FM, WSFM LP 103.3 in Asheville, this is The Final Straw Radio, a weekly anarchist and anti-authoritarian radio show broadcasting out of occupied Salagi land in southern Appalachia. We bring you voices and perspectives from projects and struggles all around the world.
Welcome to The Final Straw Radio Show. I'm your host, Cypress. This week I spoke with Io Ascarium. Our conversation covered their work as a member of the ABO, also known as ABO Comix Collective, as well as their work in comics and print. ABO Comix Collective is a group of buds and comrades working to help LGBTQ and HIV positive prisoners publish their art and stay connected to the outside world. They also provide direct material aid to those inside and spread the good word of prison abolition. Their third volume of art was released for presale earlier this month. All proceeds go back to the contributors. You can visit their site at abocomics.com, that's comics with an X. You can visit Io's shop at thing.bigcartel.com.
TFSR is a proud member of the Channel Zero network of anarchist podcasts. Here's a jingle from another member of CZN.
Good morning, slaves. Looking for relief from the steaming hot plate of bullshit served up on the daily by the mainstream media? Are you thirsting for solid and reliable information to escape the mind-numbing vortex of corporate news and Trump tweets? Are you ready to check out every time you hear Despacito on the radio one more fucking time? Then tune your dial to Sub.media, a mouth-watering hub of infotainment and subversion that'll make you want to quit your job and join the motherfucking resistance. Dive into our newly designed website and gorge yourself on one of the 500 plus videos and audio tracks from our vast library of anarchist films, hip-hop, and riot porn, or choose from one of our original shows like Trouble, Burning Cop Car, A's for Anarchy, Video Ninja Reports, and The Stimulator. Fuck Netflix. Watch Sub.media.
But first, a few words from anarchist prisoner Sean Swain.
What you say, what you say, what you say, what? We'll call like a blood! A little over a week ago, President Trump rolled out the biggest thing since Al Gore invented the internet. It's huge, world-changing, bigger than the Beatles jamming with Jesus at Woodstock. In a speech before U.S. military representatives, Trump announced the creation of a new branch of military service, the Space Force. Now, I'm going to say that again, and I hope Burst puts the appropriate echo on those words in order to underscore how monumental this is. Space Force. The reason this is so monumental is that Trump's plan is jackwagon, chucklehead, wackadoodle dumb. The single most ridiculous thing any president of anything ever announced. When I first heard about this, I was immediately convinced that Trump has been putting us all on, all along, that he's really been sabotaging everything as much as he can, essentially punking the whole world in one giant global gag, and his rollout of Space Force is designed to see how many morons will keep cheering no matter what ridiculous nonsense falls out of his pie hole. I just knew it. Nobody could be serious about Space Force. For anyone familiar with cheesy popular culture, this is not the first incarnation of Space Force. You'll recall G.I. Joe was part of Space Force. Perhaps Trump is rolling this out on the theory that neither Russia nor Ukraine interfered with U.S. elections. Maybe his latest theory is that elections were interfered with by Cobra Commander and Destro. Or maybe Trump was just inspired by hearing the voice of Ben Kenobi when he was bowling. He was trying to pick up a spare and heard Ben Kenobi say, "Feel the Force." I bet Space Force will have some pretty cool uniforms. If Trump testifies at the impeachment trial, he could arrive in his Space Force helmet and moon boots. That would be impressive. Right after he gave the speech and rolled out his plans for Space Force, Trump authorized funds for developing lightsabers and for a Jedi training program. I've already admitted that if I were a Jedi, there would be a 100% chance that I would use the Force inappropriately. But I'm still going to apply to the U.S. Jedi Academy. I understand Yoda is going to be the first non-human cabinet member. Pence is rumored to be removed from the 2020 ticket. He's being replaced by Captain Kirk. I hope Trump isn't doing all of this just to blast himself into space to avoid getting in the ring with me. Remember, I challenged Trump Pence to a 2-on-1 submission-only tables, ladders, and chairs cage match. So, Trump might be going into orbit to avoid this suplex. Boom. Or it could be he just wants an excuse to get Rudy Giuliani off the planet before his impeachment trial starts. He hasn't clarified if humans will comprise Space Force, or if he plans to create a clone army. However it works, Space Force gives us some insight into how Trump's mind really works. He's convinced that just about every network and internet news source is fake news, but he apparently thinks the History Channel's presentations about ancient aliens is credible news. By the History Channel narrative, the deep state has been hiding the existence of a secret moon base from Trump, and he's now preparing a defense against ancient alien lizard people. If he can't defend U.S. election systems, at least he can protect the secret base on the moon. How many troops do you think are stationed up there anyway? And I wonder... Wait a minute. And I wonder what they use to shoot the ancient alien lizard people. There's no oxygen in space, so guns don't work. I guess we'll find out by watching the History Channel's Ancient Alien series. The lizard people built the pyramids, you know. The premise behind Space Force is generally valid. The premise is, if there really is intelligent life somewhere out there in the universe, there's a good probability that they won't like us. I suspect that's likely true. I'm pretty intelligent, and I don't like us. But I would propose to you that we might have some more emergent and immediate crises, one of which is the fact that experts say we've got at most 12 years to radically alter our habits around the globe before we pass the point of no return and doom all life on the planet. In a world where Russians are floating submarines up the Hudson River, Trump is fantasizing about building a hotel on Mars. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me that we could reasonably think it's a good idea to export our shit into the universe when we've done such a phantasmerific job f***ing up our own world. And really, nobody is better at f***ing up our world than Donald Trump. It's really disturbing, in light of all the solvable crises going on right now, that our fart goblin king is gazing off at the stars. So I have to wonder, what's the red line on this? How crazy cray-cray does the self-appointed chosen one have to get before someone stops him? If he starts wearing a black cape and full-face helmet and tries to strangle rogue cabinet members with his mind, then will someone step in and swear in Mike Pence? It feels like we're confronted with crisis after crisis, the overwhelming accumulation of human immiseration, and the most powerful wackadoodle on the planet is setting aside billions of dollars to build the f***ing Death Star. It's too much for words. But don't give up hope. We have a couple of possible ways out of this. It could be that Boris and Natasha will deliver me 100% of the vote, and I'll enact the 90-day program I've got posted at swain2020.org. Or, who knows, maybe the lizard people will save us. This is anarchist prisoner Sean Swain, in exile from Ohio at Buckingham Correctional in Dillon, Virginia. If you're infiltrating Space Force, you are the resistance.
You can write to Sean Swain at his latest address at Sean Swain, number 2015638, Buckingham Correctional, P.O. Box 430, Dillwyn, Virginia, 23936. You can find his past writings, recordings of his audio segments, and updates on his case at seanswain.org, or now follow him on Twitter at @SwainRocks.
Thank you so much for coming on the show today. Could you introduce yourself by your name, pronouns, and the work that you do and whatever projects you're involved in?
Yeah, this is Io Ascarium. I go by they, them. I work on ABO Comics and my own comics and prints, probably other stuff too. Who knows? I'm just very flustered to be here on the Final Straw Radio Hour, ready to tell all your listeners to stop telling me to Google Bookchin. I will never do that.
Okay, is it ABO Comics or is it ABO or both?
We go by both. I've started calling it ABO because I was telling an Australian friend about it. Apparently, it's a slur in Australia. We didn't realize that because we're foolish Americans. So we started going by ABO and the acronyms up to everyone else to describe. Obviously, it's short for abolitionists, but just to open up the Australian markets, we started going by ABO, but I know what you're saying if you call it ABO.
So today we're going to talk about your work as both an artist and a propagandist, and also your role in the collective ABO Comics. Could you start by telling listeners what ABO Comics is, how it started, how long you've been working on the project, and some of the more recent updates with the project?
Yeah, it started in 2017. Me and two other friends, I guess it started it because we were frustrated with like the normal avenues of activism that were sort of available to people. That, you know, we were in the Bay Area. A lot of anarchist organizing sort of revolves around the next time that you'll be in the street, which doesn't really keep pressure on, doesn't make a great deal of material change. I, as much as in love as I am with the big public confrontations, it's exhausting and demoralizing to not like be able to do things without clear or measurable goals. And my collective mate Casper was already trying to sell the artwork of some prisoners that he was pen pals with and doing like a really good job. Casper is like an incredible advocate for prisoners around the United States, and I was just an anarchist who also happened to like be in the comics community, so it's kind of made sense to smash our loves of comics and our hatred of prisons together to try and get prisoners not only some more money into their commissaries, but to connect them to a bigger community and to bring their art out into those communities.
Are you speaking about how to bring, I'm assuming, queer and trans prisoners into the comics community? Is that the community you're referring to?
Mostly, like, I feel as though the comics community has its core that has been like incredibly supportive, but like there's tons of comics and zines fans that, you know, like are clued in to what's going on. So getting like the comics and art or whatever onto like comic shelves or just sort of like in front of the eyes of whoever's going by it will have the like dual purpose of not only maybe somebody will be like interested in hearing these stories from people who have an experience, I assume, that is largely different from their own, but keeps it in people's brains that like, oh, people who are locked away have stories and art to tell and do still. And mostly it was sort of like a attempt to keep that in people's frontal lobe about, prisoners being people. Could be anybody in your scene, and it's bonkers that we let people just get like thrown away in cages like this. So it was like started as a radicalizing attempt that may have the added benefit of being able to provide some material aid to these people that doesn't like take the form of charity. These people are making their own stories, and they're being compensated. All the profits that ABO makes is sent back to the artists. of course. And so being able to give those people a avenue to like both make their art, be compensated for it, and have them feel a connection to life outside prison walls was our original goal when we started it in 2017. With like mostly community support and totally no amount of shoplifting supplies and whatever else we did to get it going. Now that we have a third volume and we're able to like be afforded grants from the city of Oakland and like prison reform and prison abolitionist sort of organizations and stuff, it's grown into something that none of us really imagined it would wind up getting to.
Welcome back to the Final Straw Radio. This is your host, Cypress. I'm speaking with Io Ascarium, artist, printmaker, and member of ABO Comix. Yeah, that's huge that you started off with one project and, as you described, an attempt, and now you're on your third volume that was just released. Congratulations. And it sounds like the project has either attempted to or successfully met so many different goals. You're talking about getting prisoners' work out there in the world. You're talking about getting people in the comics world, whether they're artists or people, maybe like enthusiasts is the right word, to engage with maybe not prison abolition, but at least like the reality of prisons and people being put in cages. And then also like not just getting prisoners' work out there, but like having the work get out there, like build like bridges in community. That's really incredible. Can you talk about the third volume's release?
Yeah. The third volume just got released earlier this month. You can go get it at ABO Comix. We spell it with an X because we're very underground and very cool. It's definitely the result of 3 years, 3+ years of us doing this project, and the result of, because we have a lot of returning artists in this volume who, just for example, one of our artists, Cypress, has contributed to every volume. And the first volume, we wanted it to be open to people who have an artistic background and who don't. We really wanted to like bring the like DIY zine ideology into it, and just like the story is the important thing. And so our friend Serbian wrote us a story and has been like obviously like really engaged with making comics since we started doing this, and now is like such a phenomenal artist that like so much better than I could be and a lot of my friends ever have been. And seeing people being able to like take to this, because we do have people who before they went inside had some of our artists had like, you know, Sunday strips in their like local paper. Some of them had book deals. One of our contributors had a book deal until the publisher found out that they were gay and didn't want, you know, that much gay stuff in their anthology. And he's on death row and sends us like absolute bangers every time. Seeing people being able to not only like connect to this like hobby, to be able to like pass the time of like, I can only imagine how miserable and like soul consuming like being in the day-to-day of prison life is without a hobby. Knowing that like some people found some solace in being able to like not only like make comics, but like have them not just be a shout into the void that they make for themselves, be giving them an avenue to go out into the comics community or just like a community at large. is really incredible. Getting letters from people that tell us that having that sort of hobby saved their lives, and not believing that like they're speaking in a hyperbole is really powerful and really has like made this incredibly worthwhile.
You described how an instrumental part of the project forming was your collective mate who had pre-existing relationships with prisoners. Could you speak to how ABO Comics solicits art from prisoners, or how artists are able to connect with you? Like, how is that exchange initiated?
Well, on the first volume, we were involved with Black and Pink and Flying Over Walls. So we put a ad out in the Black and Pink newsletter that goes out nationwide to like queer and trans people in prison. You know, everyone who saw that and had been a comic artist or was interested in making a story or a comic or whatever, we made sure to include that like we would help them pay for artist supplies through the commissary. And a lot of people responded for the first volume through that. And by the time the second volume came around, word had gotten around through that, where like people were just telling their friends or whoever about it in prison. And we got a lot of new people. We got some returning people. It was sort of spread through that way. We've gotten a few people who, like friends on the outside who have prisoner pen pals, have mailed them information about us, and they've submitted their own. It was just sort of a result of that one like newsletter, and then just like word of mouth getting around like prisons, and in between like prisoner transfers and whatever, it's spread farther than the original newsletter seems to have in the first place.
This is cheesy, but it's just so heartwarming to hear about a queer and trans prisoner project be able to like proliferate and spread through like all these different channels of communication when the prison industrial complex works so hard to block connections like that.
Yeah, I agree. The prison industrial complex is crafty. Yeah, the only way we can communicate with our contributors is through the mail generally, which means that we have to contend with like all the arbitrary rules that go through the mail. And if you break them or bend them, or like, you know, do something close to the mark of just like, I don't know about that, for whoever's checking the mail at that time, they'll punish you by never letting you know if your letter made it from one end to the other, in the way that prisons like to punish everyone involved with a prisoner or whatever, like the big leaky punishment reactors just radiating vindictiveness into the world. But yeah, everyone finds ways around that, and not only have like the prisoners found a way to connect each other to this like avenue to get their art outside of prison walls, but a couple of people who have heard about it have tried to help us out. A lot of like prison abolitionists, or you know, like prison reformists who are on the right track, but not unfortunately fully convinced that prisons are a draconian nightmare that we should all fight against every day, all the time. Have helped us when we got like banned from a certain state's prison system, and we had to edit the anthology so it didn't have, I think one page had a stray or a something on the page. We had to censor it until they could go into the jail because it was considered pornography. Since that happened, a lot of people have sort of hooked up with us, believing rightly that art is a tremendous thing for prisoners, especially like in this pressure cooker, hoping to like punish people for being poor, that giving them the opportunity to do art has been good, which is why we're now like fortunate enough to be like hooked up with grants and things like that. So we no longer have to sort of only sell like T-shirts of a mean skeleton or whatever to fund the operations.
I really appreciated your description of prisons as a leaky punishment reactor when there's so many different avenues and methods for prisons, institutionally, the individuals working inside them to repress prisoners, obviously, but also then punish anyone who's trying to connect with them on the outside.
Yeah, they hate you for caring.
Do you think ABO Comics being so explicitly a prison abolitionist project that's also for queer and trans prisoners impacts or affects the artwork of the submissions that you get, or like who is drawn to submit to the anthologies?
I'm not sure. I certainly know from the people who contribute it, who have talked with us about it, that none of them believe they are getting, they're engaging with like a healing environment, or like anything less than like this punitive nightmare that they're obviously living through. I won't speak for people saying that like they also are prison abolitionists or whatever, but it does seem like a lot of people involved are very appreciative that we aren't condescending to them with the. I'm sure that a lot of things that they encounter are reformist and very and treat them, it sort of infantilize them as just like, oh, you did a bad thing or whatever, and we're not coming at them like this. We're just trying to start with the like, I don't think no matter what you did, this is a good thing. This is not a healthy thing. This is not anywhere that anyone should be if we our goal is to live in something functioning, something that can like in any way resemble a fair community. I don't know. I think that we're very open about being abolitionists, but we don't harp on it as hard as we did on the first volume, perhaps. But like, everyone who works with us, especially on the outside, knows that like we aren't going to flex around with like reformist ideals in any way other than a thought experiment. Like, we don't think that there's any hope for reform, and we want everyone to know that loud and clear.
Kind of like a second facet of that question was about it also being like a queer and trans specific anthology, and whether or not you've like gotten feedback, or if the art indicates like, oh, this is like a safer outlet for me to express like my reality as a queer and trans person.
Yeah, a great deal of the stories sometimes are like fictional. Sometimes it's like manga, superhero stuff, stories that people just have in their heads that they want to get out, and a lot, but most of them are autobiographical or semi-autobiographical, and deal with being queer or trans in prison and the reality of that, which is often very ugly, and often very hilarious in its own way. So I feel like people, having it be specifically queer and trans people in this anthology, gives them a venue where they feel like they will, not only do they have a outlet where they hopefully believe people won't be judging them for the place that they live. They won't be judged for being queer, which they are in the place that they live. And I think it's important for queers, especially, to understand that reality, especially for us who maybe live in major cities, who maybe don't have to like deal with the like ins and outs and like the sort of bewildering hot and cold relationship that like the modern age has towards queerness, because it's a completely different world in prison, and hearing these stories can afford us a ton of context to our own world, and it behooves us all to understand like what prison actually is, what actually goes on in prison, not just like you're thrown away from your life and your community and everything you hold dear to be punished for whatever you're being punished for, and thrown into this like this system where everyone is sort of like making do the best that they can. Being able to describe that as a queer person is there's just a lot of phenomenal stories that have really taken me. Every single new issue takes me aback and gives me new perspective on, you know, everything I thought I knew about queerness. Yeah. So I'm glad that people feel like they are comfortable sharing those stories, and I'm really thankful to hear about them.
Welcome back to the Final Straw Radio. This is your host, Cypress. I'm speaking with Io Ascarium, artist, printmaker, and member of ABO Comix. So what you were saying was making me think about how the art that is in these anthologies can kind of serve as like an archive of like an experience of queer and transness that like I haven't really seen, like certainly not in the academy, like the experience of like, not that there's one experience, but like experiences of queer and trans people who have been incarcerated or are incarcerated. But yeah, I'm just thinking about how like this project has been able to do so many different things for the people who are submitting, but also for like you guys as a collective, and then like people who are like consuming the art. And I really like the idea of it being kind of like a record, and also like, I don't want to say educational, but like informative and illuminating, and like really I like the idea of like maybe there's queer and trans people who don't consider themselves prison abolitionists that maybe will move closer to that through reading this anthology. That is absolutely my number one hope. And I think the hope all of us went into when making this, and the fact that it has been so much more successful than any of us anticipated. Hopefully that's what it's doing. But that's what you brought up about it being sort of an archive of prisoners' perspectives. There's plenty of prisoners' perspectives out there, and there's plenty of like comics from prisoners out there already. But I certainly hope that someday ABO serves as only like a historical document for like what life was like when we had such a runaway prison industrial complex at the very least.
based on the reaction we've gotten from the comics community and queers in general, I really do think that I hope I don't sound like too self-congratulatory, especially because Casper is the one who has done most of the accounting and all the boring work, and therefore the most important work for this project. But I think that we've changed a lot of people from just prison doesn't seem great or whatever to just oh yeah, this not only is harmful to the people who go in, but it absolutely harms our vision of society and what we can expect from one another, our ideas of accountability, and just pretty much it just poisons the well on any sort of community we would like to see in each other. At least for a few people, I hope.
Going back to ABO's role or place in the larger comics community, I know you guys won a Prism Award. Could you talk about what winning that award was like?
Yeah, it was it was the first award we've won, and I don't know, it was very confusing, because obviously we still are surprised with every new milestone this project takes. I think a lot of us have been involved in a lot of scummy punk DIY type projects that success is very alien to us. But Prism is a comics publishing company and sort of just springboard for a lot of queer comics in more of the mainstream comics world. The indie comics community is extremely queer and trans and gender secessionist on its own. But at the place where we were awarded it, San Diego Comic-Con, that the big city destroying event that happens in San Diego every year, I don't know, it felt really great to be recognized in that way for best anthology, not just sort of a sort of hey, good job, we believe in your project on charity means or whatever. It was really bolstered our spirits to be able to call ourselves the award-winning ABO Comics or whatever. Casper and I both went. I have been going to San Diego Comic-Con for the last 10 years-ish, and Casper goes every once in a while. So we were both there to accept the award, and it was really nice to feel a sort of connection to the work that we're doing, especially because when I go to San Diego Comic-Con, I don't go to engage with the part of me that likes nerdy stuff or whatever. I go because I'm a glutton for punishment, and I love to watch culture in terminal velocity, and the nightmare fandoms on parade through that place just puts me in the things I hate most are strangers, loud noises, and crowds, and those are all three of them. But for some reason, I'm able to dissociate enough to get to an extremely weird and good time while I'm there. To be able to take a break from that extremely weird experience of being there to be like, oh, hey, like something that we've done has had a effect outside of the community that I knew or suspected would care about this. It's bled into the mainstream mainstream in quotation marks, or whatever, and is continuing on that course was really, I don't know. It was really, it really helped us as we were heading towards the third anthology, and as we like continue to try and grow what we are doing with just like helping prisoners get their artwork out into the world.
Can you say a little bit more about how winning the award helped the project and the artists in the project?
Yeah, I think that it's been very hard to see the effect of the project for people inside for obvious reasons. Being able to write them saying that we won an award is really nothing to sneeze at. A lot of people seemed really excited to be involved in an award-winning project, to have helped make it an award-winning project. And as we've been going on of trying to, as we're getting grants and no longer just focusing on the anthology, but publishing individual works by people, individual stories by prisoners, and beginning to try and build comics curriculum in prisons based on one of the grants we've been given. It really gave us a, like, we were determined before, but it was an extra shot in the arm to keep up what we're doing. And the comics community has been extremely supportive, but being able to tell comic shops when you're trying to sell them your anthology or something, this is award winning. Somebody saw fit to give us a little statue on a piece of wood for how good we did. So don't you want this on your store shelf? Really makes a difference with people, turns out.
When you talk about being an egalitarian art form, is that something that you've found through years of making comics and screen printing and memes? You're most famously a celebrity for Be Gay, Do Crime. So I'm wondering if that egalitarianism is something that drew you into the art form to begin with, or if it's like a potential that you found through your years of making art.
I don't know. I honestly, I've been in the comic scene for close to a decade now, and I think when I first got into it, I was what's the word? A mess. That's the word. Yeah, like we're old friends. You know me. I was a train hopping oogle for a while, and but I was also sort of moonlighting at a publisher that I was with for close to a decade, and I think I've always gravitated towards comics the same way that I gravitated towards zine culture. I think comics is an art form that formal and technical skill is not especially required and not especially valued in the same way that it is in, say, like, game developing or sort of the other mediums that a lot of like really impressive independent art is coming out in this day and age. Because not only is comics something that values ideas and imagination and ingenuity over most other else, but its supplies are either super cheap or really easily shoplifted, and it has a really low barrier for entry. And the reason that I've gravitated towards comics as opposed to zine culture, which I also have a very soft place in my heart for, is because words feel inefficient and words are traitors. Let's just put the tiger on the table. Words are traitors and should not be trusted. It takes the original Odd Couple of words and pictures to, touch that ambient nerve we're all collectively, pawing at. So I think that after years of, being a fan of comics and doing comics, but like I said, I was a big old mess. I lost most of them. I sort of was able to see what I valued in that scene as a scene, not just a collective of people doing the same things, because comics is a scene that has proven itself remarkably resilient to a lot of things. When people rightly called out this scumbag rapist in the scene, the rapist decided to sue about 10 people who called him out for being a rapist and chased him out of the scene because we want a safe scene and etc. He's been suing these people for probably going on 2 years now, and the comics community has and continues to come out to make sure that these people don't have to pay legal fees for this absolute scumbag toilet man to try and upend their lives. Another example I could bring up is one of the bigger independent comics conventions of the year. Certainly my favorite of them is the Small Press Expo that happens in Bethesda. Around that, and a lot of other independent comics fests are involved in this as well. Around that, a lot of comics artists noticed that one of the sponsors was Comixology. Comixology is a medium that is trying to publish digital comics and make these really, really cheap on-demand printing services for artists, and it's completely run. It's a subsidiary of Amazon. This was around the exact same time that Amazon was very obviously and more or less openly supporting ICE detention facilities and just helping ICE, helping cops, helping just the most repugnant shit on earth. And so many people in the comics community came together to make a list and a movement called Cartoonists Against Amazon to keep the pressure on other cartoonists and people who put on these cons. And almost all of us are friends with each other. It's not, none of it is separated from a personal relationship in one way or another. Putting the pressure on these people to stop taking donations from Amazon, and all of us being yeah, we're all willing to help you with the burden that I know that Amazon can throw a lot of money at you to help keep these conventions going, but it's worth it to us to not have this subculture co-opted in any way, especially by the most evil shit we could possibly think of right now. So it's not a scene full of, self-flagellating liberal types. People are generally pretty down. People have been really supportive of ABO, if that's any indication. And an even better indication is that a ton of people also publish prisoner comics and have asked prisoners from ABO to contribute to their anthologies. Whenever I'm at a convention, and I usually try and table some more, like, let's just call them like a little more aggro zines than normal, and people are genuinely pretty stoked on it. Like, a lot of the like queer folks who show up and are like really stoked on Be Gay Do Crime stuff, I'll give some like gender nihilism literature or whatever, and they're like over the moon about it.
When you were speaking to like comic artists and cartoonists boycotting Amazon for their connection to ICE, it made me think about the recent boycott, like from DIY musicians that happened pretty recently. No music for ICE. Just like interesting. We're like talking again about like DIY art coming back to like fighting the state and state repression, and ultimately like coming out against putting people in cages.
I think that, well, I can't necessarily say because I feel like I was more connected to cartoonists against Amazon than I was no music for ICE movements. I feel as though one of them influenced the other. It's my understanding that like cartoonists against Amazon started really early, and maybe helped clue a lot of other DIY scenes into how insidious Amazon is in its sponsorships, and maybe the course corrections that it imposes on music festivals or comics fests, any sort of place that we all gather where they may find they may believe that they can find acolytes to serve as the head of the spear to say like, I don't agree with everything they do, but, at least they're sponsoring XYZ or whatever. They seem to care about whatever. Cause yeah, who gives a shit? Like I understand the sentiment, because money is bad, and thinking about it is a nightmare. If some Thomas Nast cartoon with a big bag with a $sign on it for a head comes up to you and says, "Listen here, I'm going to give you $10 million to put Comixology on your banner, so everyone will believe that this is a good organization," and bleed into their understanding about either, Amazon being something that is a necessary evil, or just like bleeding it into something that's to use a inappropriate slogan, too big to fail, too important to contend with, which I feel like a lot of DIY scenes have fallen prey to when they become popular. Like, it's not a coincidence that since superhero movies have become popular, a lot more corporate industries have taken an interest in independent comics to make Netflix series or whatever they want to do with it. I think that all of us making our feelings known, and it doesn't feel like a shaming of each other to, not sell out the way that, a lot of people in the punk scene may put it, but an understanding of like, we're all trying to all of our goals are to make a living with the things that we are making while not compromising the things that we believe in. And that is, our privilege as people who have sort of dedicated our lives to this thing, if we're at the point that we're at. I think it's for lack of a better term, a way of keeping each other honest.
So I want to get to this idea of like radical politics being a fandom. It's something that I've seen online with anti-fascism in the United States. Like you could buy anti-fascist flags, and that was really popular. Just like endless GIFs and memes of Richard Spencer getting punched, which is great. We should share that till the end of time, or the internet, or whatever comes first. But yes, it goes back to that idea of like you can't measure where people are at, or like how ideas are spreading by reblogs or retweets, or like what you said, like transmutations of a radical idea or a meme or a graphic. Do you have feelings, or have you noticed any trends about like Be Gay Do Crime being transmuted in that way? Is that important to think about, or like does it affect you personally as the artist? I know that you've spoken in other interviews about how you don't like to take credit for the phrase, but you're still like most famously known at this point for that image.
Yeah, that image haunts me. I like threw it up went around the time that we were making the first ABO, and then I woke up the next morning and Twitter was really into breaking laws and being queer, and I was like, oh, sick. But suddenly I had this, I don't know, I felt like I had this strange authority, but like, I don't know, it's part of the chaotic ether that like weird shit that people have been tagging forever, like ACAB or whatever. It happened to cross the line into the mainstream consciousness. I feel like it may have been around since sodomy laws were a lot more buck wild and mask off against queer sex, but that I don't know. That's just conjecture. If somebody told me they came up with it, I won't believe them. It certainly seems to have spread the idea that the coolest thing you can be is a homosexual criminal, and the coolest thing you can do is hurt the police's feelings, which is what I'm extremely into. And while I do believe that, like, you know, even though it's become this meme that, you know, may have inspired a lot of other people to, you know, scam a life back from a system that would rather see them dead. It also, you know, gave straight liberals something really fun to yell at the Pride Parade or whatever. I certainly hope that it makes people recognize crime for the noble pursuit that it is, and that, you know, recognize that crime is a word used to describe what it takes for a lot of people to survive and stand life under capitalism, and that, like finding a way to afford yourself a life against that sort of system is sick as hell. But I don't know. I guess it's mostly just a part of me being an irony poisoned drama queen who wants to take nihilism and make it fashion. Mostly. Like at the bottom of everything, it's absurd that humans evolved from fish into something that melted the ice caps. And if we're all going to live in the burning circus tent of the 21st century in this fucking comically cruel, bewilderingly stupid epoch, to like meet it with shock and awe would be a mistake. And maybe me taking a flippant approach to that is a result of my privilege, or it's a solid survival tactic. My guess that's a combination of the two. I don't know. If we're going to deal with our chances honestly, I don't mean that people should force joy, because I don't. But engaging with our situation with reverence and honor just sounds so embarrassing.
There's no time.
there's no time anymore.
I just we are in the burning circus tent, like we don't need to have time for that necessarily.
We're the first generation. From all I understand, we are the first generation to have a timeline for our destruction. People who believed that the world was going to end by nuclear annihilation sort of lived with that existential fear all day, every day. We're the ones who are looking at a distant horizon where we're all trying to build up plans for how to deal with it, what it may look like, and what we're going to do when it comes. And I don't know. I don't want our scene or any of the scenes connected to us to wind up doing a heel turn if that comes to pass. I think we have the strength and the community to fight against it valiantly.
Yes.
So that's what Be Gay, Do Crime means to me. I don't know. It is very flippant. Like I can attach whatever meaning I want to it about how we should all sort of recognize that crime is a meaningless word, or that we're all going to have to get a lot cooler with the idea of crime if we want to get out of this situation, because obviously nothing else anyone is doing on a major scale is working. And that queers are at the forefront of that. Marginalized folks are high among the list of people who have to worry about crime. I have a great deal of privilege to think of it as a fun thing to make a meme about. But especially post Sets the Fosta, a lot of us, have to deal with that in reality, beyond the reality of I'm going to go into Michael's and shoplift as many art supplies as I can to distribute to all the homeless queers on Haight Street, I'm a faggot, Father Christmas, or whatever. I don't know. To nutshell this, because this meme has taken over my goddamn life, and I think memes should be destroyed because of what it has made me into. Even even though it's had the ability to, like, you know, sell shirts and prints to bail people out of prison or whatever, memes should be destroyed, and everyone should recognize that being a gay criminal is the coolest thing you can do, and war on bourgeoisie morality is the coolest thing you can engage with. What was the question? What were we talking about? Dragons or something?
Before...
I think Smog is the worst dragon.
Okay, that's an easy one. Like, that's not that controversial of a statement.
That's true. I don't want to be controversial on your podcast. Smog, he's bad. He's bad, folks.
Yeah, before I ask you about playing D&D in the circus tent, I wanted to loop back to, like, when I first asked you about, like, your art and, like, the catharsis that I got out of it. And, you know, sure, be gay, do crime, like, can be flippant, and, like, there's catharsis in that, but my experience of it was be gay, do crime, and, like, I immediately thought about, like, all the queers and trans people who, like, crime is an everyday part of their life for survival. And then also, like, we're around the same age, and so, like, we were both alive when sodomy laws were still on the books in the United States, and, like, being queer is also, like, still a crime in many places across the globe. Like, that hasn't changed. And there's also, like, you know, bathroom bills, like, in North Carolina. So, like, that's another argument for, like, being gay is, like, also, like, doing the crime, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did I don't know if you don't have me muted, do you?
No.
Okay. I could tell because you gave me a window. Did I mention that? Because I did want to mention, like, sodomy laws and stuff like that. I'm not, I feel like, did I mention that when I was just talking?
It was like a sentence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can talk about that if you want, though. Like, you know, yeah, I'm just not sure. I'm just not sure how much I can talk about it, because I want to make people aware that, like, I wasn't the first person to say be gay, do crime. It just feels like I was the one who popularized it. And I don't think that I've only been able to assume that it may have come about when sodomy laws were a lot stricter, but it's, you know, it's been a part of the cultural zeitgeist for a while. And I really don't know, because, like, I use it in a sense of the youth culture anarchist who's just like, whatever, fuck it all, etc. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I could talk about that if you tee me up for it. The only thing else I can talk about with Be Gay Do Crime is, like, I don't know. I feel like it's boring shit to talk about, like, you know, how, like, you know, that sort of helps pay my rent now, but it would be there. I wouldn't feel comfortable making money off of it if that money didn't partially go to people who were in jail for doing crimes, and that that phrase has been co-opted by, like, you know, HBO and a lot of other, like, corporate entities, to the point where I have been toying around with copywriting it, and I'm not actually sure if I want to talk about that on if you want to talk about it on a podcast, that's all the invitation I need. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's interesting, but it's more like I talk with my friends and it's interesting. Either way, I don't
I'm interested
care.
in it. What does the comics curriculum project entail, and who's involved with the project?
The comics curriculum project is ongoing right now, and it should be implemented very soon in 2020. But it, I guess it started. We got a grant to try and develop comics making curriculum in prison, which is essentially like training some teachers or training some other prisoners to help other prisoners have a handle on certain ways of making comics, and give them some tips on drawing, anatomy, whatever, to whatever they may want to make their comics better. But there's no real set formula for how you're supposed to make comics, and we wanted to sort of keep it free form, and keep it like we wanted people to feel encouraged if they had never made a comic before, and equally if they had, been making comics for years and years, and are now just sort of dealing with making comics under prison conditions. We've always wanted to make people understand what that's like, and what, having to make comics based on buying overpriced things from the commissary, like just buying printer paper and like extremely bad pencils and stuff from the commissary store or whatever, what people went through to bring these comics to you. And we, Casper and I were able to go to Stanford. My friend Andy Warner happens to be a teacher at Stanford with the Stanford Comics Project. What they do is, students at Stanford will all collaboratively decide on a historical story. They will all sort of write a way of presenting the story, and collaboratively draw and script and whatever the story over the course of a semester, make a really impressive book. They've been doing it for a few years, and it's always extremely impressive. This last year, they were doing a story on the Pelican Bay hunger strike, and Andy's been really supportive of ABO since it started, and asked us to come in and talk to people about what ABO is about, what making comics in prison is about, and what we've sort of learned to give these students a perspective when writing the script about, what prison life is like, and if they had any lingering questions that we as people on the outside may feel qualified to answer about, whatever they may have. And people were really welcoming, and it was really cool. As somebody who's as bitter as I am, and who's just like, college is a scam, it was really a delight to be there with folks talking about that.
Welcome back to the Final Straw Radio. This is your host, Cypress. I'm speaking with Io Ascarium, artist, printmaker, and member of ABO Comix. That's really exciting that y'all as a collective have been able to branch out and have many different elements of a project that started just a few years ago.
The teachers of that class are consulting and helping us develop a lesson plan to sort of help people, learn how to make comics better, learn how to storyboard better, or whatever. Just give them some tools that they can choose from to work on comics more. And hopefully once that's implemented, we'll see a lot more people in prison telling us their stories through comics. I truly believe that comics is one of the most egalitarian art forms, and a really, at least for me, and I know a lot of other people, a lot of prisoners that I've talked to, a really like good grounding exercise. Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see on that, but that's my hope at the very least.
Before this interview, we talked about not wanting to fall into the trap of political art or an artist who considers himself politicized inherently being an activist. And I think we got to that into like how ABO or ABO is an art project, but like has so many different branches and like so many different ways of connecting people that's like the activism, and like making the anthology happen is activism, not inherently like just making art. And also something you and I have discussed is political art, maybe your art specifically, like being like propaganda. And that's something that I've experienced in your work. Is like I've gotten kind of like a catharsis out of specifically your prints, whether it's like All Lawmen Must Die or Be Gay Do Crime. There's an absurdist level that like I think can like bring a sense of relief, and also like recognition of like queer and trans like anarchist like views, while still like kind of making a joke.
But yeah, I don't know. Like art as propaganda in 2020 or whatever year this is released as, or whatever year people are releasing it or listening to it as, is only important to the point where it's successful based on what it inspires in others, but you absolutely cannot measure that in reblogs or whatever. And these words feel like stagnant bog water coming out of my mouth, but memes are the propaganda of this day and age. It's the way that propaganda is spread, and that's the same for left and right and everything outside that divide entirely. But it transmutes the message people are trying to convey into a product that is to be consumed and processed quickly. And when something is assimilated into that spectacle, it's difficult to tell if it helps to radicalize people or it merely shepherds people into this like fandom of radicalism.
One of the things I've been most excited to talk to you about today is being big gay nerds, which brings me to one of your comics called No Gods, No Dungeon Masters, which I just want to note that words by Io, art by Rachel Dukes, and cover by Andy Warner. And since, as you said, words are traitors, I just want to tell listeners the cover of No Gods, No Dungeon Masters is a police car being crushed by a giant D20 die. You know, like being a queer and trans anarchist, that it's so heavily informed the way I experience D&D. So often tabletop games like that are sort of just like dismissed as escapist. But I know a lot of people who have, especially marginalized folks or people who consider themselves like maybe in the struggle against existing power structures, have benefited in so many different ways, either through like community building or like empathy building or catharsis and even just plain joy, right, from these games. No Gods, No Dungeon Masters says, it just helps make life less of a screeching, blood-soaked nightmare, which is important too, especially because all of that Anarchy A stuff can make you a big sad idiot. Can you talk about D&D and RPGs and
whether it's because I am on an intellectual pole opposite of a lot of my theory reading comrades, or because I just have an ADD brain, or because I think that theory is more useless than fiction. I think that fiction is a more encouraging teacher than any toothless academic theory. I think that realism is inevitably going to reproduce the existing order and morality, no matter how hard you try. And to varying degrees, there's still, a lot of theory that I like, but I would never admit to it on a podcast or something. So yeah, like you said, and I guess like I said, because you were quoting me. Yeah, it makes life less of a shrieking, blood-soaked nightmare. And I wrote No Gods, No Dungeon Masters around the time that I was a train hopping Oogle who was basically trying to LARP a morally dubious wandering adventurer who didn't think that they would, live past 26. And I think that was a result of being really into sci-fi and fantasy, in that a great deal of us who are invested in radical politics are in love with the potential, but obsessed with the limitations. And we build our lives around those limitations, and exist in the few fantasies that we like to imagine, and it's very limiting when you are acting out with your friends. It becomes very different, especially because it's possible we are living in the loneliest time in human history. Conducting rituals to overcome our antisocial tendencies or our atomized tendencies is very good, and all the better if it means that I can just pretend to be an orc with all of my friends. When I first started getting into more and more fantasy beyond, Golden Compass and Lord of the Rings and stuff, which I still have like a very big chamber of my heart locked away from everything else that will have some allegiance to that no matter what. I realized that I was learning more about, my transness, my queerness, and eventually the gender nihilism that I now identify with from, I gathered more from the Monster Manual than I did from Baton, if that connects with anybody. You could see these things as play or as thought experiments, but when I'm feeling especially galaxy brained, I will sort of think of them maybe as a void filler for the spirituality that a lot of us lack. It's just a pattern breaker to connect you with the world that we exist in, and whatever lies under the misery modern life has created.
I really like how there's a thread right now with what we're talking about. I mean, you said fiction as a maybe better, but at the very least, just like a different and an alternative teacher than theory, which is something that Margaret Killjoy spoke to a little bit in a recent episode with William on the show. So that's exciting to like see that thread with like two different conversations on this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm really hung up on this idea, what you said about how as anarchists, like we are very much like invested in like the potential and the possibilities, but obsessed with the limitations. And there's so much there, but what I'm thinking about right now, since we're talking about D&D, is like how in my practice in these games, like the games have like often challenged me to like think beyond all of these limitations that I am obsessed with, and how like I'm gonna sound a little bit like a D&D evangelicist, but I am, and that's okay. In my years of playing, I've found that I've had to like fight against these limitations, and like with like my friends, we push each other and encourage each other around those limitations, and that can be, I don't know, it can just like feel so good and be like very intellectually stimulating. I don't know if you have any knowledge of this. I feel like I can't speak to like any concrete examples about people playing RPGs in prison. I know that, you know, we talked so much about like all the different ways that the Leaky punishment institution represses people and confines and constricts them creatively. So I know that like one way that prisoners have gotten around like dice not being allowed in is like they've used pencils and like labeled the different like angles like with different numbers and like use that as a die, which like hearing that was like so exciting to me. Do you know of anything like that? Like, can you speak to anything like that?
Yeah, a lot of the pen pals I have in prison have asked for RPGs. I have a file on my computer of one sheet RPGs that are really easy to print out and put in, you know, an envelope for your pen pals, and anyone who is interested in that, feel free to hit me up on Twitter or wherever, and I will definitely share that with you. RPGs that don't require die. I know some like minimum security prisons can allow die. Most all of them do not. Everyone has to get very creative about how they play games, but you know, I can go on and on about how important it feels for me and a lot of other people I deal with to have this social ritual that doesn't, you know, revolve around, you know, perhaps the always depressing real life that kind of a lot of us have to deal with all the time. It's you know, I can only imagine how important.
Thank you for getting so nerdy with me in this podcast. Is there anything we didn't touch on, whether it's related to ABO stuff or your art or prison abolition, anything else you want to share with listeners?
I don't know, anybody who wants to. I started making prints when the FASH were getting extremely uppity in Berkeley around like 2016, just by sneaking into the UC Berkeley library and like trying to learn Photoshop when I was living in my van parking nearby there. Everyone else should do that and and reacquaint themselves with the noble art of wheat pasting to try and demoralize fascists or just anyone who tucks their shirt in, maybe. More seriously, I suppose everyone should go check out ABO Comix with an X.com. Comics with an X because we're very cool, like Robert Crumb. That is parody. Robert Crumb is a piss man. Never mind. Yeah. I think that might be everything. Yeah, come say hello at comic convention or a book fair or wherever I might show up. If you see one of us on the street, I was about to say just say hello to us, but don't. We're all very shy. I don't want to talk to you.
Io does want to talk to you. I'm just gonna fight them on this one.
I do. I'm so kind.
How can people stay up to date with your own work?
For my stuff, I'm on Twitter. Io Ascarium, IOASCARIUM. On that website, ABO Comics is how you find us on Twitter and Insta and stuff. Yeah, I've got a shop that for the next month or two, I'm gonna be selling prints of that meme everyone seems to really like to try and raise money to bail folks out in the city that I live in. It is etsy.com/shop/bumlung, BUMLUNG.
Thank you so much for coming on today. Thank you and your collective mates for doing the work that you do. Thanks for getting nerdy with me.
Always, forever, always.
That was Io talking about memes, propaganda, and their work with ABO Comics. You can visit ABO's website at abocomicswithanx.com. You can visit Io's shop at thing.bigcartel.com.
If you'd like to use any episode for your project or radio show, feel free to do so. Just send us an email to let us know. If you care to, you can send us letters at The Final Straw Radio, P.O. Box 6004, Asheville, North Carolina, 28816. This show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned co-op in Asheville specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a catalog of Firestorm's books and zines, plus a full calendar of events up at their website, firestorm.coop.